Good morning. So I'm really pleased to welcome you to one of Keystone's online webinars, and this webinar is focused on engineering at degree level, considering engineering at undergraduate level. And I'm really pleased to be joined by John Gale, who is our head of maths at Keystone Tutors. He's been a teacher for over 15 years now and was a head of physics, a head of science, and has spent an awfully long time working with students who are preparing for engineering and science-based degrees, specialising obviously at the physics end and maths end of the spectrum, so hard sciences. So that will be very useful with regards to thinking about engineering. The way this first part of the webinar is going to work is I'm going to pose a couple of questions to John. The idea being is that we're hopefully going to tap into his knowledge and understanding of engineering, the thought process one should go through. And then afterwards, we'll have a Q&A where we'll welcome some questions from the participants. Brilliant. Great. So John, thanks for coming.
That's all right.
So I wonder, when we're thinking about engineering, one of the first things that kind of springs to mind is that there's quite a lot of choice. So what I was wondering if you could do for us would be to give us an understanding of the different types of engineering courses that are on offer and perhaps touch on how they differ.
So I think the key fundamental thing between the courses on offer are whether you approach a general engineering course, which typically runs over a 4-year period and is split into a 2+2, where in the initial first and second year of the course you would study general engineering modules that universities believe are fundamental to all branches of engineering. And then in your third and fourth year, you start to specialise. Or whether you look from the outset to read a course that is niche and specialised from the outset. I think that obviously depends on your kind of feelings in terms of, do you know what kind of engineering you're looking to go into, if you have certain career aspirations or kind of workplace aspirations. Then I think it's a case of looking at whether you go down a course which is more theoretical. For example, the Oxford and Cambridge courses are both theory-based, or whether you look to read a more vocational course somewhere that has, say, for example, access to a year in industry. And that, again, sort of driven by your personal kind of feelings about what route you want to go down. So I think that in the first instance is the initial question that you should be looking to ask yourself, really.
Okay, so thinking about the general versus applied courses, in the general and applied, you said there were these fundamental modules that would be covered in the 2+2 scenario. I was just wondering, could you give us an example of what these sorts of aspects of engineering that will be covered almost in most of the courses that you choose to do?
So I think fundamental to any engineering course is going to be some highly advanced mathematics. That sort of underpins everything that you will do on an engineering course. So if that's not something you're into, then I think then there's kind of a materials element, looking at the nature of materials, how kind of structure and bonding lead to kind of physical properties and things like that. I think there's kind of process engineering modules that courses look at in terms of how you go about problem solving. So we have a question that we want to answer in a sort of applied way. We want to build a solution to a problem. How do we actually go about kind of working that problem and coming up with a process that leads to some solution at the end of it?
Okay.
I think that, sorry.
So with regards, I was thinking about the maths. So if I'm a student and I'm in year 12 or I'm in year 11 and I'm thinking about year 12, is it the case when you're saying sort of maths is going to be a fundamental part of any engineering degree? What level of maths are we? If I'm doing A levels, do I need to be doing just A level maths? Do I need to be doing further maths? Do I need, if I'm IB, could I get away with sort of mathematical studies, doing it standard level, or do I need to be doing higher level mathematical analysis or mathematical studies? Where do I need to be pitching myself if I'm thinking about engineering?
So it's a great question, and actually it's an incredibly broad question, and it is solely down to the course that you choose to do. So There are courses that don't require mathematics at all at A level. So, for example, some chemical engineering applied courses that you might start on might purely ask for chemistry and nothing else. The vast majority of courses, however, will require at a minimum A-level mathematics, or if you're studying a IB level, a higher level maths course. Cambridge, if you're looking to read engineering at Cambridge, from this September, they are now saying that further maths is a requirement, whereas in the past it has been a highly kind of desirable course for students to read. They are now stipulating it is a requirement. So that obviously is going to inform the choice of A-levels that you take. There are questions regarding certain schools that don't provide further maths courses, and in the past Cambridge have said if that is the case, if your sixth form don't provide mathematics, that they will look at your personal approach to going about reading further mathematics. So in your spare time outside of school, reviewing pure maths, doing pure maths modules.
Okay,
that was one kind of workaround for that.
Okay, and so with regards to thinking about sort of the general versus the applied and your kind of course options at A level, if you are in year 11, you're thinking forward. Are there any other complementary subjects that you should be considering doing alongside maths, further maths, if you're unsure as to whether you might go down the more applied route or the general route?
I think obviously physics is the number one sort of priority for people to look at. In fact, an awful lot of the general engineering courses that you can read at different universities state that physics and maths are a requirement for you to have. And then the vast majority over the 3 A levels that students will sit, in general terms, maths, physics are requirements for, as I say, the general engineering courses, and then one other academic subject as well. So they typically like to see another hard science, chemistry, biology, etc. But again, that's open. So I think with the modular nature of courses nowadays, you're seeing a lot of students who are reading engineering sitting business modules and things like that are kind of optional modules that they may look to sit. And obviously, if you're doing kind of economics or business studies at A level, then that's something that you might consider if you're looking to sit an engineering degree more as a skill set to then segue into a different career option. For example, that might be something to consider.
So one more question about this general versus applied. So in the general engineering degrees, we kind of know roughly their titles, but in the more applied versions, what are the sort of most popular degree titles? So chemical engineering we've covered.
Yeah.
What are the other ones for people to be alert to?
So I think civil engineering, aeronautical engineering, ship science as well, or nautical engineering, some universities refer to it. Material science is a standalone course, but I think a lot of universities refer to it as material science with engineering. So they cover a really broad spectrum. There's also things like fire science. So Leeds, I know, has a great fire science course that is in an engineering course. It is an engineering degree. So yeah, I mean, there's a really broad range of applied options out there for people.
And now, what with sort of the advance of technology, there's sort of software engineering, computer engineering,
AI, things like this as well. Yeah, absolutely.
One particular course which I've been looking at recently, which is well worth a view for some people, is Mechatronics, which tends to kind of Mechatronics is a course title. Not all universities offer it, but quite a few do, which sort of wraps together things like computer science, robotics, artificial intelligence, and there is also some engineering in there as well. So it's quite an interesting course, a rich sort of subject matter all contained into one, and I think you can manoeuvre your way into specialising as you go through the 4 years into one of those fields or a couple of those fields. Great. Okay, so with regards to, we've looked at general, we've looked at applied, we've also considered this idea of theoretical versus vocational. If you're unsure about that, what might be the advantage of one over the other? So if you know you want to do engineering, but you're not quite sure whether you want to do more of a vocational course versus a theoretical course, could you just talk about the pros and cons, having studied engineering yourself?
Yeah, I think again, it sort of comes down to a more long-term view of what you want to do with that degree. So if you know that you want to move into some engineering field, then I think a vocational course is really highly regarded. A lot of friends that I was at university with who are engineers, they're in the field of engineering, working for different companies. They actually work for companies who they got internships with over their year in industry. So that's a great way of kind of actually gaining some experience of how the things that you're learning at university are applied in the real world. It gets you kind of known within the industry. You meet a lot of kind of people that are good to know and network with. So I think the vocational course really is sort of for people that know that they want to be in the field of engineering. As I say, the more kind of theoretical things, I have friends who studied engineering who are investment bankers, they are chartered surveyors, so they have moved into industries where the skill set that engineering develops is highly sought after, that kind of analytical problem solving, really highly regarded. And it doesn't really require that depth of vocational knowledge. So a year in industry for somebody who studied engineering and has then gone on to be an investment banker is a bit of it's not as necessary as somebody who's gone down the more practical route engineering-wise. So I think a theoretical course appeals to those sorts of people far more.
Fair enough. Great. So we touched on a few of the courses that are often put in the same bucket as engineering when students are considering it. So material science is one, but what are the sorts of differences between a straight up engineering degree, whether that be applied or general, and the likes of a material science?
So material science is a particularly niche subject area, so it looks at kind of designing materials to work in particular ways. So I mentioned earlier about kind of structure and bonding and how that leads to the properties that a material might have. So you might be trying to come up with a solution to a problem that requires you to develop some new material. So I think things like graphene that's come out quite recently, and kind of how you then manipulate and alloy materials together to kind of solve that problem. And so from the outset, that course is more heavily focused on looking at the kind of the chemistry and physics of different types of materials. Whereas engineering, there will be elements of material science within it. So you will do specific modules on materials choice and how they kind of influence what you're trying to do. But it will be far broader. So there will be specific modules rather than intensely focusing on those elements of the course.
Fair enough. And I think for some of our participants in today's webinar, that they're considering Oxford and Cambridge potentially on the engineering front. So on Oxford, you've got engineering or you've got material sciences, and in Cambridge, you've got engineering, chemical engineering, but there's also natural sciences.
Yeah.
And I wonder, if you weren't sure and you didn't think engineering was absolutely the thing you wanted to do, could natural sciences be a good fit, given that you can move quite flexibly within that undergraduate course framework?
Yeah, I think so. I think again, it's you're being asked to make decisions about what you want to do with the rest of your life at a frighteningly early age, really. And so if you are not sure what you want to do, then trying to keep things as broad as possible is a really clever choice. You're still developing the skills that an engineering course would sort of build in terms of sitting natural sciences. It's focusing on very similar things. It's kind of giving you those analytical powers, but it's less narrowing. It's less niche, and so for a lot of employers, that's obviously a much more favourable course option that they would look at graduates having, I think.
Fair enough. Okay, so I think that kind of brings to a close the kind of different options that are out there. This idea there is a general engineering course, perhaps for those that know they want to be engineers, but maybe aren't so sure about how they want to apply that knowledge and what field they might want to enter. There's the applied field, which is very specific chemical engineering example, lots more in that area, and obviously probing the different options there would be advisable. And then on the other side of things, there are courses that are related, very much so, often joint honours, material science and engineering, but also things perhaps as tenuously linked to something like natural sciences might be one for consideration. Okay, just thinking about the course choices then, and perhaps thinking about the competitiveness of an engineering programme, are there sort of strategic choices that you might make with respect to course choice? So, for example, might you be better if you were looking at Oxford to be looking at the material sciences course rather than the engineering course? And actually you might achieve the same outcome in the end, if that makes sense?
It's an interesting question, and I know a lot of universities, once you're on a course, will allow you to make transition to another course within a given period of time of starting. How that would work in terms of material sciences to a general engineering course, I'm not sure. I've never asked that question, actually. So I think it's a difficult one. I think if you know, quite firmly what you want to do, then I would say that actually looking to do an applied course somewhere is probably a good option. I think that you would find a far less competitive field if you knew a very niche area that you wanted to study.
Fair enough.
The trade-off of that is obviously with niche courses there are generally less places on offer, whereas for a general engineering course there might be more places, but you might be dealing with a much more competitive field in terms of the sheer numbers of people that are applying to read that course. So I think it's an interesting trade-off there.
Do you think it's simply fair to say that ultimately those that are applying for engineering or engineering related courses are often doing the hard sciences and are often pretty capable academics themselves? So the relative competitiveness of courses is probably, although some courses might take more applicants than others, actually when it comes down to the relative competitiveness of the applicants themselves, they're probably going to be pretty competitive.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as you say, by the nature of the type of student that is going to be applying to those courses, the grade requirement in and of itself kind of sort of weeds out those that are not really sort of par for the course.
Sure.
And so by the nature of that, it is an extremely competitive field. Yeah. And so if you're kind of predicted those sorts of grades, then you're in with a shout, and I think a lot of universities put an awful lot of emphasis on the interview process as well. So
sure.
Actually, you have an opportunity to sell yourself in a kind of on a personal level, really, and I think that counts for an awful lot as well.
Yeah, so that would be obviously specific to Oxford and Cambridge predominantly, yeah. So, okay, so I'm just wondering in terms of your choice. I mean, you've sort of answered the question already, but if you're uncertain about where you might want to sort of throw your hat at sort of in the ring of that course, are you suggesting that a general engineering degree pretty much covers everything?
Yeah, I would say
and that
so.
would be the sort of primary option if you're not that sure about
for sure.
The field you might want to enter?
For sure. I think that given the fact that you spend 2 years studying the broad range on a general engineering course, it gives you an opportunity to kind of find your footing, and then obviously in the third year you can start to specialise.
And if, for example, you did a general engineering degree, but through that process you decide that you're really particularly interested in one field, are you able to kind of navigate more towards that specialism?
Absolutely. So in the third and fourth year, there are several core modules that you will need to sit, but the emphasis becomes more on the optional modules, and that's your opportunity to then really tailor the course that you're sitting to your desires in terms of the areas that you want to focus.
Great. Okay. So I think we sort of covered the idea of course, the sort of recommendations that you have if you're not sure sort of about where you might want to specialise, sort of perhaps focusing on more of those general engineering courses and potentially thinking about the applied versus, the theoretical versus the vocational. So the idea of doing that year in industry versus doing a more theoretical course. Great. I'm just wondering, with regards to kind of the university UK landscape, what are the sort of best engineering departments that are out there? Could you give us sort of some examples?
Well, I think the obvious ones would be Oxford, Cambridge, Imperial. I think they are kind of the cream of what's going on engineering-wise at the moment. And then you have the likes of Bristol, Swansea, Durham, Warwick, Leeds, Manchester, which are kind of the sort of the next rung down, really.
Loughborough also?
So interesting, Loughborough has an excellent reputation. It's sort of slipped a little in recent years, but it is still a really highly regarded course to kind of read.
Great. And so I'm just wondering if when you're making your 5 choices, and let's say you have Oxford or Cambridge at the top, we tend to apply the principle ARI, sort of aspirational, realistic, and insurance. Yeah. So let's say you have 1 aspirational in either Oxford or Cambridge or perhaps Imperial. You have 3 sort of realistic chances. And you're looking for an insurance offer, which, as you and I both know, you should never put one in there that you wouldn't go to.
Yeah, absolutely.
What would be the sort of less fashionable but academically very sound sort of engineering programme out there that you might recommend somebody consider for perhaps a 4th or 5th choice?
Yeah, I think places like Swansea is really sort of doing amazing things, actually, and it's moving up the rankings really swiftly. It's got an excellent reputation, particularly from a vocational perspective. Places such as Bristol, for example, again, really, really good reputation. Plymouth is on the up as well. So if you're looking for those kind of insurance places, those would be really good options. I mean, they're still competitive, but if you're considering sort of 2 A stars and an A, and then they're asking for maybe 2 A's and a B, that's quite a realistic insurance policy to have.
And I guess just related back to the principle of ARI that I said, an aspirational option might be sort of 2 A stars and an A. A realistic option might be at your expected, so A star, AA, whereas then your insurance might be sort of a B might creep in there, so you say you 2 A's and a B. Okay, so let's focus now into Oxford and Cambridge, because I know some of our participants today are looking at those two. They both offer a general engineering course, but what are the differences? I appreciate that we've got material sciences, which isn't engineering at Oxford, but it's a similar sort of course that one might consider. Yeah. And we've got chemical engineering at Cambridge, which again is a slightly different sort of specialism on the engineering side there. But if you look at the 2 engineering courses, are there differences, or ultimately they're the same?
I think ultimately they're very, very similar. They're very traditional engineering courses, so they cover all of the kind of fundamental elements of what an engineering course would be, as we discussed earlier. They offer very similar modules in terms of the optional focuses that you would get in your 3rd and 4th year. I think really in terms of the choice between the 2 of them, I think it comes down to your just personal preference, really. Kind of, I would strongly advise going to look at both of those universities, getting a feel for the departments, speaking to other students that may be on those courses, researching the kind of the teaching fellows that are there. What opportunities are they sort of pursuing in terms of the research that they're doing, because that kind of ultimately influences a lot of funding that those departments have. But ultimately, they're very, very similar in terms of the things they're doing.
I guess from my take on it, the background has often been that Cambridge has had a particularly strong set of scientific and STEM-related courses. And often people associate then the investment in and around the Cambridge retail parks. Yeah. We've got chip manufacturers, all sorts of scientific companies there having headquarters or certainly offices in and around Cambridge. There's this thought that they're ahead in those sorts of fields. But I think, would you agree with me in saying that obviously on the material sciences, particularly in Oxford, there are some really big contracts in terms of research, but by sort of aerospace companies looking at the development of materials and things
Oxford
like that.
Industries and things like that, Oxford Instruments. There's some really, really big hitting material science stuff going on over there at the moment.
Okay, so thinking departmentally, you were talking about looking at professors and what particular research grants departments might have, and as a consequence how that might potentially affect the optional modules in the 3rd and 4th year. I'm just wondering, are there any particular departments that are doing things that are in vogue at the moment, like artificial intelligence, more on the robotic side of things?
So I know Edinburgh has a really highly regarded AI department. Their engineering course does a lot in that regard as well. I was actually reading yesterday that Oxford have just started to offer a 6-week kind of bolt-on course in artificial intelligence that for some reasons run through the side business school, which seems slightly strange given the nature of the course. I think like anything, there are universities that are very quick to adopt these sorts of courses. Because they want to be competitive, they're looking to attract the best of the best, and then there are those universities that are a bit more sluggish in terms of adopting these things. But I think wherever you go, that these sorts of on vogue things will creep in. So we were talking about the AI stuff, kind of bioengineering. There's a lot of that going on as well. So all of these universities will start to have these optional modules that you can read.
Yeah, certainly from my take on it, there are sort of three areas which seem to be sort of burgeoning: the idea of sort of computer science, but also software engineering, robotics and AI. And it certainly seems to be the case that some universities now are offering much more vocational courses, which are very, very specific. I guess we've discussed the sort of pitfalls of going down that route, because that very much puts you in one camp, as opposed to a more sort of general engineering degree, which would keep you broader, potentially for longer, which, if you're not sure, would probably be a good thing. I just thought we'd end by thinking about the sort of preparations. If you're an aspiring engineer, or you think that this might be a degree course for you, what sorts of things would you recommend doing above and beyond your academic studies that could anyway sort of help you both in terms of your application, but also in terms of the thought process with regards to the kind of course choice?
I think there's an awful lot of reading to be done around these areas, and so universities will be looking at students that are up to date with what's going on in the engineering world. They're reading journals, they're reading key texts, and they're showing an active interest in their kind of independent lives away from school, of really kind of having an understanding of where the industry is going. I think that if a student has access to some industrial experience, if you can get a work experience place over a summer, then that is also invaluable. Just in terms of showing that you're making an informed choice about the degree course that you're looking to sit as well.
What about things like, for example, I remember when you and I were science teachers, we used to try and encourage people to sign on to the New Scientist, for example. I appreciate that's more of a biochemistry magazine than it is sort of a hard science one. But are these sorts of periodicals that appear useful, things, reading around science and things like National Geographic? I appreciate that sort of more mainstream.
I think there are definitely things that I think the issue is that for some admissions tutors, a lot of the time, these things can be seen as a bit of a box ticking exercise. Sure. That everybody's saying, oh, I read this, I read that, and it's not genuine, And so I think there is a real need for students to show an innate passion for the subject. And I think if you have that, then the things that you are doing outside of school naturally kind of feel far more genuine. Sure. And I think that would be my main point to sort of put across on that. Make what you are doing genuine. Be interested in the things you are doing. Don't just simply use it as a box ticking exercise.
Sure, and I guess just perhaps for me to close, I think with these vocational courses, which engineering definitely would be, the idea that you do an engineering course to become an engineer, this concept I think means that you have to really demonstrate why you've made that choice. Obviously, if you're choosing more of an applied route, so a chemical engineer or a more specific engineering course, I think you have to make that a stronger case to some extent about why perhaps this is more applicable for you than maybe a general engineering course. So I think many of the things we've said, texts, I mean, obviously things like TED, but a lot of the university websites now will provide an awful lot of supplementary material for students, aspiring students to look at. But the final point I probably would make is a lot of big business now, particularly sort of in the sort of chemical engineering side, the big companies that own a lot of the big brands, but also the oil companies, etc. They do have a lot of educational outreach which is quite interesting. And often it's engineering that's solving a great deal of their problems, whether they be BP in dealing with oil refineries and the like, or Unilever and looking at some of their packaging, or the ways in which they kind of produce some of their key brands. So I would definitely encourage you to peruse not only the university websites and their recommended reading, but also TED, perhaps things like The New Scientist, these sorts of things. These can be great places to start an interest, and then from there you can move into other avenues. John, I think we're going to stop there. Thanks for that. We could probably go on for a lot longer, but hopefully that's given a good overview. What we'll do now is open up